John, it's good to see you.
You too.
I love that we were in the back just catching up on gossip, let's say,
Yes.
about the tech ecosystem. And that's because John goes pretty way back
Yes.
in the tech ecosystem, and he just knows a ton of people and their stories. So it's always nice to kind of get a feeling for how things are.
Great, thank you.
So you know what, I want to start off with talking, we have a lot to talk about, and I'm going to save some time at the end for questions as well, a short Q&A. So if you have something in mind, hold on to it and you'll get a chance to put that to John. I wanted to first start off by talking about productivity.
Yes.
You know, there's been a lot that's been said and written about Canada's lagging productivity. Can you make the connection for me between innovation, what innovation and the tech ecosystem can do for productivity in Canada?
Great. First of all, thank you everybody for the opportunity. A great opening question in that I think people do confuse the two terms. Oh, sorry. How's that? Is that better? Thank you. People confuse innovation and productivity. They are different, but they complement one another. So the best way to think about it, the innovation community of which most of you belong to are the tool makers that create technologies for other businesses to be more productive. So the other businesses leverage your technologies to make their businesses bigger, faster, cheaper, with more insights. Now, part of the challenge on productivity is you do need innovation in order to be more productive, and whether that comes in the form of robotics, AI, what have you. When you have a weak innovation community, it is more challenging to be productive because you don't have the talent pool that's embedding those technologies in the traditional businesses. So that's why when you see people talk about the productivity, you also look to see what does the innovation sector look like around that.
So, now that we've sort of have that definition, I think it's important to in some sense to boost that ecosystem so that we can see a boost in productivity as well. Can you tell me how Canada is positioned against the G7? Our ecosystem is positioned against everywhere else in the G7.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak from an innovation perspective. I think that it's a better comparison whether you use the G7 or you use the OECD. I tend to use the OECD and I add in Brazil, China, Russia, because you don't even get the right comparisons. The reason why in the G7 is that a lot of the G7, they're going through their own struggles, particularly in Western Europe. Yeah. But Canada fares, I'd say, reasonably well if you were to take it down to 3 buckets. But all of them are under stress right now. Number 1 bucket is the access to capital. With now interest rates going back to its long-term historical average, we had a 10-year period where capital was abundant. We are going to go in a period where capital is less abundant. And it's more challenging with Canadian domestic sources of capital. Number 2 is talent. You're seeing this a couple of years ago when I was asked this question, was talking about the world is going to become a much more dangerous place. The world is becoming a more dangerous place, and one of the backlashes is going to be immigration. Canada is still a paradise on immigration, but as you can tell, having controlled immigration so that you don't really mess up your infrastructure is critical. We've inadvertently created a horrible housing crisis, which was always there, but we've inflamed it. So now you're going to see tensions on talent. And the third area is on the markets. And Canadian domestic markets, you're seeing our economy is sputtering along. It's not in recession, as there might be in the UK or Germany, but it's not knocking the lights out. So we're going to now see a period for a lot of the innovators a more challenging next number of years versus the previous 10 years in which they perhaps have been more accustomed to.
What is it that you think that has changed, or do you see some change on that talent front?
Well,
do you think that it used to be more difficult before and it's easier now? It was easier before, more difficult now to attract talent to the country?
if this was 2009, I would be saying the same thing that I'm saying right now. So people think, oh my God, everything is different and new. No, it just kind of.
So this has always been a problem.
This has always been a problem. And starting around 2010, 2011, a number of policies and opportunities were put into play to reverse. We were talking about the brain drain
Back then.
What's happened that's a little bit different now is Canada's balance sheet was much more in a solid position. Because largely of COVID, but not solely of COVID, Canada has gone on a spending spree that hasn't stopped. And part of the challenge now is that our ability to be flexible and to do things that we were trying to do back in 2009 is under great pressure. So where I get more worried now is that, yes, it feels like 2009 all over again, talking about the brain drain, but because our balance sheet is worse today than it was 10 or 15 years ago, I think there is a heightened level of anxiety, number one. Number two, there is a heightened level of anxiety around the world.
Yes.
And no matter which country you speak to, Canada is not unique on this anxiety. Frankly, the only country in the world that has probably the least anxiety is the United States. And that's the Americans for you.
You think that's true?
Yeah, they have anxieties for different reasons, not for economic ones. But yes, you're right.
They have other anxiety.
Yeah, they have political anxieties coming up in about 3 months.
In a couple of months, yeah. So recently, you're talking about a couple of things in the environment. I want to talk a little bit about tax changes recently.
Yes.
It was first a measure in the most recent budget, and now it has been voted in the House of Commons. So, at the start of this, it was a measure to change the cap gains inclusion rate to be higher. So what that means is that when you have capital gains, you were taxed 50% of it, and that is now moved up to 66% if it's over $250,000. And a lot of people in the ecosystem have been speaking out against it. Yep. There are a couple of people that I've also heard that have said, hey, you know what, it's been higher before and these things happen. But tell me your thoughts about the increase itself, and also what you think the impact that it has on the ecosystem.
Sure. Yeah, tax is always a lightning rod. I would say that entrepreneurs think about money very differently than most people do. Money, for the most part, doesn't drive them. Fixing a big problem, changing the world drives them. Whether there's some higher taxation on a great outcome, at the end of the day, that's not what's going to change their behavior. However, what will change their behavior is when you're building a company, these again are folks that are thinking of, I want to change the world. And what's incumbent upon them is they need to do all things possible to maximize their chances. And slowly over the last 5 to 10 years, building a company in Canada has become more and more difficult, particularly when you compare yourself to the United States. And it's a bit of an unfair comparison, but it's the closest one that we always compare ourselves to. And what people forget is that the people who are making this decision are the most mobile of people. And they're also wired to go anywhere if it increases the chances of them building companies. So now again, for the first time, and I would say COVID played a role in that it taught people one thing: leaving one's country actually isn't as complicated as they thought it was. And this includes folks with some extreme wealth. And during COVID, I've seen a number of my friends who are very, very wealthy, and it'd be in the middle of the winter, and I look over their shoulder on a Zoom call, and I go, hey, that ocean is not in backyard Toronto. Where the hell are you? And they'd say, okay, well, I'm in Florida. And Florida was the big place. And I said, what did you do? And he goes, well, when Canada got crazy during COVID, they went to Florida where they continued living their lives. And they started to realize, Jesus, I could actually run my business here.
And I could really go anywhere to do
and
this.
I could go anywhere because my business is not in Canada. My back office, my R&D is, but my customers are in the US or elsewhere. So the problem is now you've got a lot of challenges against you. You've got increased housing costs, increased food costs, et cetera, increased energy costs. And now you're pitting the entrepreneurs who have a 1 in a million chance of success, right? We all know most will fail. So the taxes doesn't even matter. But on the odds that you finally break it, you're an evil person. You're greedy. Like, the reaction is, you gotta be kidding. Do you know how hard it is? I am risking my economic wealth, my future, everything, because I want to change the world. And you're pitting the success of entrepreneurialism as an evil thing, where in the United States in particular, success is cherished and respected. Here, the messaging was vilification. So the taxes wasn't really the issue, it was the narrative. And with a narrative like that, this has been an ongoing narrative. Starting in 2015, for those who might remember, there was stock option changes, which we fought against and won. There was this passive income tax changes in 2017, fought hard and won against it. It's been an ongoing battle. And so the countries that are going to win in this difficult time are those that embrace innovation and entrepreneurship. So this policy was absolutely at the absolute wrong time. Last thing I would say is, I don't know about any of you entrepreneurs here, but do you ever spend money that you don't have? You know, you go bankrupt. Well, we seem not to worry about that. And we talk about generational equity. Well, let me tell you, putting, $2 trillion of debt on my children, when they're going to have to deal with that, that is not generational equity. That's penalizing them. And so it's this whole narrative that's got everybody up in arms.
But I look at also that budget, and then there were a couple of things that were announced in there that I would say were positive things for the startup community.
Yes.
There was this $600 million that was committed towards SHRED, which is the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Measure. In case anyone doesn't know how that works, it's basically a tax credit that you can apply for any expenses you have that are related to research and development. It's anything between 15 to 35%, I think, right? So there was $600 million for that.
Yeah.
Then there was the Canadian Entrepreneurs Investment Initiative, I think, which was another one. So there was a couple of measures in that.
There was really 3 measures. So there was the SHRED.
Yes.
It's actually SHRED reform plus the $600 million. So I wrote...
Which was, how do you feel about the SHRED alone?
I wrote it.
Oh, you wrote it, okay.
So,
and so you were happy with, you think that was some progress?
I was thrilled by that, and again, what it was designed to do, I wrote it so that there was not one additional dollar spent by the taxpayers. It was to reallocate who was getting the tax credit. 1/3 of tax credits going to foreign large multinationals. Can you imagine that? Your taxpayer dollars going to subsidize a foreign-based company. It's like, why would you do that? So I was reallocating and adding more to Canadian-based domestic companies, and then they added another 600. Great check mark. This is the part that actually was frustrating. This was a great work. Second thing was on the AI. In fact, Justin Trudeau and I were chatting. He was asking for any unique policy things that he can do. And I said to him, why don't you make a statement about AI? Because Canada has, quote, birthed it, and yet we sort of losing the narrative a little bit. And they came up with the $2.4 billion to AI. It wasn't intended to be the end all and be all, but it was a narrative of, hey, Canada is behind AI. I thought it was a nice big fat check mark. There was a third area around procurement, which wasn't really discussed. And actually the fourth area was open banking, which is continually still not happening. All great measures, and I was very supportive. And then you started to see, well, that's not what caused an additional $20 billion of spending. It was all the other goodies that was intended to be quite populist, because they saw the polls that were so far behind the Conservatives that they needed as much money to throw around to garner votes. And the way to do this was obviously going after the entrepreneurs and the innovators. But you're shooting in the foot the very community that you're trying to stimulate. And that's why it fell flat.
So, one of the things that you've pointed out is this idea of signals. And you feel that some of these things, even though the changes to SHRED were positive, these other things are signals to the community to say, this is how we see you, or perhaps create an environment that doesn't feel very attractive to them. And it's not just international startups or international talent. It's also, that person who's working in a company who might, in some large company that wants to switch into working in tech, or a new grad that wants to work for a startup. These are also people that are looking at signals. So that's the signal from the government that we're talking about. I sometimes wonder, though, around this whole change with cap gains, I was seeing a lot of established entrepreneurs and leaders such as yourself speaking out against it.
Yes.
And were you worried that might be sending out a signal to people to go, hold on, if people that are established in this community are saying these things, why am I considering a move into this environment?
Yes. Here's the great news. See how quickly this change was made by the stroke of a pen? That same pen could make the stroke of the change to reverse it. And that's what we're going to need. This is actually an opportunity that in Canada has been a nation that's been largely governed in the center. Whether you're right of center or left of center, it doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. When you start to polarize, and you see this in the United States as well, either you're now very left or you're very right, and the folks in the center get beaten up. So like Joe Biden is actually at the center. He's slightly center left, but he gets pulled even more left. In Canada, part of the challenge where the Liberal Party was largely viewed as the centrist party of Canada for decades. The Progressive Conservative Party was viewed as slightly right of center. When the Progressive Conservatives merged with the Reform Party, it moved it more right, but not extreme right, but more right. But there were folks in the party who would like it to go extreme right. And every time you have a movement going one way, you have an equal and opposite reaction going the other way. And for those of you who might recall, when Trudeau came in 2015, he literally went left of the NDP. So Thomas Mulcair at the time was actually the centrist left. It was very unusual. And the problem is, it's this polarization that is really causing the angst in this country. And what we really need is governance back in the center. And again, center left, center right, no one really cares. So going to your point, when people see governments going either extreme left or extreme right, because they're equally bad, it is incumbent upon the populace to speak out and not being afraid to speak out. When you don't speak out, the consequences are absolutely worse. And I'm actually very pleased that when people are speaking out, they are speaking out of passion for their country. And what it tells me is the number of people here who absolutely love this country. This country is a paradise for the rest of the world. Let's keep it that way, but we got to keep it somewhat fiscally responsible. And again, by commenting very publicly, what you would do is important, because what I don't like is people who just shit on policies and it's like, okay, great, what would you do?
What would you rather have instead?
Well, and if you have nothing to say, then shut up, right? And so my view is, I literally, actually, you could see it today. I just wrote I'm doing a series of white papers. It's very, very brief. I just did it on LinkedIn today. Starting off, I have a whole series of public policy ideas, which, by the way, I've presented it both to the Liberals and the Conservatives, and the Conservatives are taking it very, very seriously. And I'm doing it not because I care about either party, because I don't. I care about who embraces the policies that support innovation and productivity in this country, and whoever does that gets my vote.
So given some of these changes that you're proposing and the environment that we're in now for startups, let's hear you make the pitch. Why do you think someone should consider, given all of this, why an international startup or international talent should consider Canada as the place where they should, not just ideation, but actually bring their startup, maybe scale it?
Yes, I'm still bullish. I mean, my fund is predicated on the future of Canada, so I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I still think this is a spectacular place to build a company. We have the advantages of being next to the greatest market in the world without being in that market and living in that market. It's wonderful. When I see how, particularly if you're coming from a different country, the way that you're embraced in this country and you're not pitted against one another just based on the color of your skin or what religion you have, etc. This is the paradise that Canada is. Sometimes we forget about it. But at the same time, we have the benefit of the brain power and some of the talent in the United States that when we seek to scale businesses that we invest in, sometimes those individuals are not in Canada. We go to the United States, and it's straightforward to hire them on here as opposed to going through 8 hours of time zones. So it's very positive. I think that it will be even more positive, because the one great thing that has happened that everybody agrees with is the future of Canada is based on innovation and productivity. And that is the one thing that all sides have agreed on. We haven't agreed on how do you fix it, but we've agreed that that is the problem, and that's where Canada needs to focus all of its attention on.
So talk to me then about, now that we've said, international talent and international startups ought to come here, why does Canada need international talent?
Well, we have
a ton of great, fabulous engineering schools.
Absolutely.
Scientific institutes that are producing people.
So our quality of schools and graduates are outstanding. Now, the challenge is we've got to make sure that they stay here largely. Every year, this has been going on for the last 30 years, they'll go to the United States or whatever, and that's absolutely fine. We churn out amazing quality. We'll need more people. We have a birth rate of 1.3 people on a per capita basis, well below the 2.1 that you need. Canada has relied on immigration to make it the wonderful country that it is. And bringing in people in this country who want to add value to this country is what we've done for the last 100 years, and it's worked exceptionally well, and I believe that is critical to the future of this country. What we just got to make sure is that when we're bringing folks in, there is, over the last, really from the post-World War II period, we did calculate how many immigrants we should be bringing in based on the infrastructure, the housing, et cetera. And it was over the last few years that we basically doubled and tripled what those numbers were. And it's led us to this massive shortage of housing. So we just got to make sure that whatever our immigration policy is, and this is essential for the survival of this country, we better make sure that the necessary infrastructure is there as well too, or else we'll be at each other's throats.
It's interesting that you talk about, I mean, housing is certainly an issue that we need to address, for multiple reasons. The other interesting thing that I just heard in the background there when I was talking to a couple of people out there is the immigration processes in this country.
Yes.
How hard, people tell me again and again, how hard it can be to immigrate to this country or bring your startup to this country, which I also think is another thing that
Absolutely.
we need to be.
Yeah, the U.S. has really accelerated. We did some amazing things, by the way. 2015, 2016, the temporary worker visas, and massively accelerated the processes of those. It was huge. The U.S. noticed that. But we focused in, it was very specifically on focusing in on the innovation sector. So you've got, for example, I would literally have a sign up out of the Indian Institute of Technology, or come to Canada, here's your passport, boom, right? These are bright kids who have gone already through their education and they want to work. These are the folks who we need. Again, sometimes, and again, it's gotten very politicized. We had this big productivity drop. It's hard to say what the permanence of it is, because we immigrated 1.2 million individuals. It's difficult to get them to be productive early on. So what we don't know today, and this is a problem, did we get unproductive people to start off with, or do we just get so many that's very difficult to integrate them, that many people in a short period of time?
And do we have the systems to make them, if they are completely ambitious, actually have a system that makes them succeed? That's
correct.
the other element to look at. Now, I know that people are going to have questions. I do want to ask you something, because I think everyone in the audience will want to know. You've invested in some incredible companies through your time. I mean, you've seen, you and the teams that you've been in have invested in Shopify, Wattpad, a whole bunch of other names that I could list off here. But now, if we take the situation now and for the next couple of years, what is it that you do and you think that investors look for in Canadian startups? What are the things that a startup can have that makes them more open for investment, or makes them attractive to investment?
Well, one of the things, the pool of talent here, particularly from the engineering-centric pool, is very good at developing complicated or deep technologies. So whether it's AI, robotics, quantum, blockchain, we're not just building applications delivering your pizza 30 seconds faster. This is where Canada can play a very significant role, maybe with the exception of some of the generative AI, LLM companies. Most of the other companies, and maybe perhaps with quantum to some extent, can be more capital efficient. So we don't have a capital advantage in this country, right? So if you are building a startup that needs $1 billion of capital, you're at a disadvantage being in this country, for sure. But a lot of these folks are building these companies, given their deep expertise, leveraging the available technologies to make their businesses cheaper, faster, better as well. And I think that with these technologies, you don't necessarily need massive numbers of people. So when I just talked about productivity, productivity is very simply the value of your goods and services sold divided by the unit labor hours worked. Well, if you are leveraging AI technologies, for example, your productivity should be shooting up because you're replacing human labor with machine labor. This works to Canada's advantage because you don't need massive quantities of people in order to produce the product or the service. So I think that given Canada's deep tech background and the fact that these advantages might go away does pose a great opportunity for Canada. In fact, if you are a pre-seed or seed investor, this is a great time to be investing because the future opportunities will show up 5 to 7 years from now, and I think Canada will be in the thick of many of those opportunities.
But when it comes to companies that you find interesting or you see other investors liking, you've mentioned deep tech, you've mentioned companies that are capital efficient, but companies themselves that are productive. It sounds like that matters to you too. Those are things that you look for when someone walks into a room.
Yes, because we've had to be far more efficient because we get less amounts of capital.
Yes.
I remember, there was 3 companies I was looking, this would have been back in 2013, 3 companies that we were looking at. Shopify, a company called BigCommerce, and Volusion, which I don't know whatever happened to them. They all had the same amount of revenues. It was, I don't remember, it was $15 or $20 million of revenue. And we were seeing that the other companies that were backed by US VCs had an abundant amount of capital. And Shopify was already, from a unit economics perspective, was already generating a 20% margin on unit economics. And I couldn't believe it at a company that early, and they said, well, we need to be more efficient. It's, now you hear about companies focusing, and it's not a growth at all costs. This is Canada. These are what Canadian companies. Yes. And in fact, when you look to see where all those great companies that I invested in, they were all built around 2008, 2009, 2010. Why? It was post the financial crisis when there was no money around.
Yes.
So they learned, build a product that customers actually use. And wouldn't that be nice if most people actually did that?
Yeah. It's interesting. I was interviewing Professor Ajay Agrawal once, and I said, is this going to mean that, when all the money started drying up, I think about a year and a half ago, and he said, actually, the companies that make it now, they're going to do really well.
Yes.
He goes, because you have to have a really great idea.
Yes.
Now, you're not going to be just some, charismatic person that gets money, which I thought was fascinating.
Yes.
I could go on, but I should take a stop now for a few minutes. I have a couple of other questions, but I'd love to get some questions from the audience here. When you do ask a question, because John hears a lot of this, no pitches here. So I'm just going to ask that you state your name, sort of your affiliation, be it an institution, a startup, or company.
We have one here.
And your question, not a statement. So I see a question here.
Yeah. Thank you, Manjula.
Oh, there's... there you go.
Hi, my name is Gilberto, partner at Radius VC. John, I want to know, how did you get so good at networking with government? And how did you get so good at networking with government?
Ooh, the secret sauce.
And wait, it's a two-parter. And what recommendation would you give for startups to take notice into what's happening in government around them?
Ooh.
Yeah. Second question is an interesting one. I took my 19-year-old son to a political fundraiser so he can see what it looks like. And the first observation he said is that I always thought politics and business were separate things, and now I realize it actually is combined. And I was like, wow, you learned that way faster than I did. If you're an entrepreneur, you better understand, government/politics, academic, corporate. You need all of those stools because they all play in the digital economy. It's very different. In the post-World War II industrial economy, you built a factory, you got a supply chain, you try to make the cheapest or best goods, and you made your money. Now, if the money that you make in IP-based businesses are based on contractual agreements, largely by government. So IP laws is basically the government telling you how much money you could make by virtue of the technology that you have. And people don't really appreciate the stroke of the pen risk with data, security, all of this stuff. If you're in the Gen AI company, you could be blown away tomorrow if they decide to put a regulatory framework in place to get rid of your business. If you're in the remote driving space, they could just say, you know what, we don't like it. Government just make those decisions. So understanding that is absolutely critical and on day one. This is the reason why myself and Jim Balsillie created the Council of Canadian Innovators, because the startups couldn't afford their own GR on their own. And we said, well, why don't we just collectivize and get 100 or now it's 150 CEOs together and just spread the costs. But it was exactly on that point. In terms of how I did it, my actual background is I was actually a tax practitioner, first at a firm called Arthur Andersen, which merged with Deloitte. And I was the global tax leader. So I understood taxation policy, but very selfishly, after the dot-com bust of 2002, by 2005, the number of new clients that we were getting was dropping like a stone because of lack of capital. So, and a lot of the folks were dying, and I took it upon myself, my firm, to say, you know what, we need to help them. Let's start to establish public policy where we needed the government to help to re-stimulate the venture capital community. It ended up becoming the Venture Capital Action Plan, or VICI, as it's known right now. And that's when I started to realize, I had this separation of government and business, and then realized, they're not trying to be difficult. They need the private sector to provide them with the ideas so that they could make a decision whether they think that's a good idea or not. If you're waiting for the government to come up with the ideas, this is when we got a really big problem here.
I won't respond to that. Thank you. That was a great question. Any other questions here? There's one over there at the corner there.
Rafa there.
We'll bring a mic
first.
to you.
Let me go here.
Oh, there's one here.
Yeah.
Okay. And same thing, please, your name,
Thank you.
The organization that you're with.
My name is Raphael. I'm the Lake House Immigration Consulting Company. And for those that are not aware of, Immigration Canada has a program for startup companies to immigrate to Canada with their companies. And then recently, the government has imposed a cap of 10 startups per designated institutions. I wanted to hear your opinion on that, and how do you see the impact of such imposition? And if you have an idea for a solution to help the ecosystem.
Yeah, no, it seemed to be a very reactionary proposal that they came in. I think that there was a view and of a number of bad actors that were in essence selling, I say selling, not literally, but selling visas into Canada and using the education system as an easy way to bypass the normal immigration route. And there was a number of bad actors. I say a number. There was a few bad actors that really poisoned the well. And when I see something like this reaction, it's really a result of the government not having a good handle on what was really going on in the first place. And they should have dealt with the actual problem of abuse as opposed to putting this blanket on and actually impacting the very good folks who want to come here. And that's what I'm worried about. The folks who we really want might be dissuaded from coming to the country. So I hope that that's only temporary until they actually fix the underlying issues.
I have another question
And
here.
a question over there?
Yeah, for Edgar first, he was
Okay.
in line.
We're coming to you at some point.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Edgar from Exact Size. How do you see quantum computing advancing in Canada? Especially when you said that quantum computing needs a large investment, and you mentioned that large investment is not here in Canada. And quantum computing, I know you invested in quantum computing.
Yes.
And eventually, every startup will need this technology in order to overcome the challenges.
Yeah, so the quantum is an area that, by the way, I am not an expert on quantum, and as somebody told me a long time ago, if you think you're an expert on quantum, you don't know quantum. So I am not an expert on quantum, but it is, when you think of the possibilities of the limitations on our current computing power and what quantum could do, I do believe it is something that will be the biggest fundamental change to the world. It will be greater than Gen AI or any of the other stuff that we're dealing with right now. It still is a ways off, but Canada has some really good advantages. As I think you were alluding to, I had spent about 7 years trying to invest in a quantum company, but there was a fundamental issue I had where you had to keep the quantum material cooled so that they're basically at 0 degrees Kelvin, and I was just kept on wondering, how can you cool something and then you have to miniaturize it, and how can you use it in an everyday application? And there was this one company, the individual, Christian Weedbrook, had emigrated from Australia, went to U of T. UT's got a great program on quantum, and we had some very good quantum assets here in Canada. And he came up with the concept of using light, or in other words, quantum working at room temperature. And all of a sudden, it was the first time that I saw the possibilities of the miniaturization of quantum being very, very real. And so I do think that this is an area that Canada can't play all things to all people, but if I were having the magic pen, there's 2 technologies that I would focus in on this country. Actually, maybe 3, if you include energy. But excluding energy, it would be quantum and it would be AI are the 2 areas. So I do hope to see Canada, and when I say Canada, here's where the government could really help our businesses by creating a quantum cloud that all businesses in Canada could actually tap into once we know that the quantum cloud is actually operating as intended. But this is an area that I am very keenly interested in, and I think that Canada is as good a place as any place in the world to develop the next market leaders.
Thank you. We have about a minute left, but we are going to take that because you've had your hand up for so long. We'll take one more question.
Yeah, Maria, please ask your question.
Thank you. My name is Maria. I am from Elephant AI, so AI field. Okay. The question will be, I come from Europe. I immigrated here to bring my company to Canada. It's been going great, but still, I notice differences between Canada and Europe, especially in terms of regulations. So what do you think about the lately introduced AI Act in Europe, and do you expect or do you think that Canada should follow and should be the place different than America, I mean United States, and introduce this kind of AI regulations, or do you think they might struggle, the AI business here?
Yeah, so this is so Canada has come up with its own set of regulations called AIDA, for short, AIDA. And Canada right now doesn't really know where we're going to land on here. And this was part of my earlier comment of understanding government and business. Canada may have lost an opportunity to be a leader in the space in terms of regulating AI. Now, number one, there's a fundamental question of, is regulation of AI, is it necessary or not? I'm of the school that you allow the private sector to drive the innovation, but with appropriate guardrails for abuse. And the problem with abuse is you won't know that somebody's abusing it until it's too late. So I do believe there should be guardrails. Europe has taken an approach of the most hands-on approach. Very, very high compliance, and some would say squeezing too much on the innovators, so that it is allowing or enabling only the most resourceful AI companies to comply. And if you're all examples of this, innovation largely comes from the very small and scrappy, and they come at the incumbents. Mm-hmm. So the European legislation really indirectly favors large incumbents, which I would say is very anti-innovation. The US is at the opposite end, and you've got a very libertarian view there where all hands are off. And the poster child would be Sam Altman, although if you watch Sam very closely, he started going to government to say, put in lots of big regulations after he raised, tens of billions of dollars, because they'll be able to afford it. And smaller competitors get squeezed out. Okay. So where do I think Canada is? I think that they're actually somewhat in the middle, and I think what's going to happen in Europe, and you're already hearing the noise, when the UK came out with its rules on AI, the United States, I thought they beat it by one day and came up with their own rules, which were much more innovative, friendly regulations. And Canada now, I think it's too late for us to think that we have the power to dictate to companies what regulations we would like for them to have. So I think Canada's going to have to make a decision of whose do they embrace. My personal view is I would go closer to the American view of regulation, not libertarian, but sensible guardrails. And already the Europeans are getting very concerned because they think that with their very difficult regulations, they've made their European-based companies at a disadvantage against the Americans. So that's why I have a feeling the Americans, and this is what happens in the digital economy now, right? It's not about supply chains again. It's about who gets to write the piece of paper to dictate how businesses operate. And right now, the United States has a distinct advantage, and Europe is in a little bit of disarray right now, and that's why, oh, and by the way, and China has its own, which is basically government will control it. So, so you're getting all of these competing interests, but if I were Canada, especially right now, I would probably go towards the Americans, make a deal with the Americans and say, hey, our Canadian companies get to leverage off of all of your US resources, including the Inflation Reduction Act and all of the various great goodies that they provide to US-based companies and make them available to Canadian companies, that's what I would be trying to do.
Well, something to watch. I think this is going to be a hot topic.
It's going to be a very hot topic.
Big topic.
And post-election in the U.S., you're going to see this being
come up again and
It's gonna
again.
come up again, yes.
I just want to say, John, one thing I have to say here, John, before I thank you, is that I believe this is you're a very hard man to find. You have a very busy schedule. And I know a lot of people try to get you onto their stages. So I know the team here is so grateful. I think this is your third time that you've appeared at this conference. So it tells me that you really care about just changing the way that international startups come to Canada. And I think you really care about that experience and about having that involvement. So thank you so much for doing it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.